Now, the gloves were off at the European Parliament in Strasbourg this week as the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, clashed with the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, during a fiery debate that saw both leaders outline opposing visions for Europe's future and laid bare their strong dislike of each other. EU correspondent Jack Parrock is here to tell us more. Hi, Jack.
Hi, Patrick. Yeah, it was a really fiery one.
What is von der Leyen's beef with Orban? I mean, lots of listeners will be aware that they're coming at this from different angles, but what was the trigger for this quite extraordinary row?
It was a really interesting one. Essentially, the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, was in Strasbourg to lay out the priorities for his 6-month presidency. So basically, each country in the EU gets to sort of chair the meetings of the governments for 6 months. And his place was to sort of lay out their priorities and what they want to do. But as expected, it came down to a bit of a sort of clash of the titans in the parliament in Strasbourg. Essentially, von der Leyen criticised Orban for doing things like allowing Chinese police in to investigate Hungarian citizens. She also accused him of releasing migrant smugglers from prison that should be in prison. And also she attacked him for supporting and meeting Putin, as she sees it. Orban sort of paints himself as this peacemaker. He went all over the world when he took over that council presidency, saying he was on a peace mission, and he's vetoed numerous times EU funding for Ukraine in its fight against the Russian invasion. You can tell, listen, the characters and the things that happened in the parliament this week aren't actually too surprising. These are the positions we know that these people have. What was interesting was the eyeballing all in the same room in a big public arena, watching them sort of tear chunks out of each other.
I mean, you've been in Brussels and Strasbourg covering this stuff closely, hearing the private tensions and understanding these positions for a long time. Now that it's bursting out into the open and you've got the added backdrop of war in Ukraine and a populist surge in Europe, just briefly, Jack, if you can, does looking at that sort of thing make you think, how sustainable is this in the medium term?
It definitely does. I mean, what Orban is accusing the EU institutions of is trying to replace him with a pro-Brussels, pro-EU government. There's some real divisions at place in the European Union at the moment, specifically over the support of Ukraine, and that mainly comes from Orban, but also over migration. You've even seen Germany turn against the EU's migration plans. And Ursula von der Leyen, who's just about to sort of pass through with her brand new commission for the next 5 years, they will have to face a series of hearings. She's going to have a lot on her plate, but she does appear to have consolidated some of her power. She's restructured the way in which she organizes her commission, and she may feel in a place to be able to take on some of the leaders like Orban. And certainly we saw the sort of inklings of that during that parliament session.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jack Parrock, talking us through that extraordinary clash in the European Parliament earlier this week between Ursula von der Leyen and Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary. Now, just a couple of years ago, by the way, it was still possible to view Orban as a bit of a lone wolf when it came to relations between the EU and Russia. But today, pro-Moscow political parties are on the march across the continent. They include the Freedom Party, which won Austria's national elections last Sunday, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, and the pro-Russian parties that are polling well in Germany. To give us a sense of what all this pro-Putin sentiment means, I caught up with the journalist John Kampfner. He's based in Berlin.
Well, where I am, Patrick, in Berlin, I think is pretty much the epicenter of the Ukraine debate, just as it is actually the epicenter of the Israel-Palestine debate as well. The atmosphere here is really hot. It's really fractious. It's really acrimonious in society, within families, but also very much in politics. We have this three-party coalition of the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberal Free Democrats. Everybody is sort of counting the months away until the next general election, which is supposed to be next September, but people are wondering if the coalition is going to last that long. And today, Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, is in town, is in Berlin. He quickly stopped off yesterday in Rome, in Paris, and in London. But he's here to see Olaf Scholz because tomorrow in Ramstein, an American base not far from Frankfurt, they have this big sort of regular convening meeting on giving weapons to Ukraine, which is NATO, EU, and wider than that. So everything that happens here is absolutely vital. Germany remains, after the United States, the biggest donor of military weaponry to Ukraine. But you'd be forgiven for wondering really whether that was the case, because Scholz seems perennially reluctant to really make the political case for Ukraine.
And domestically, does that leave him vulnerable? Because there are lots of forces aligning in German politics that are willing to challenge that consensus. I mean, who are they?
So the two parties of the extremes, one is the AfD, out and out far right party. I mean, these labels are now increasingly difficult to use. What's the difference between far right, extreme right, alt right, that kind of thing? But the AfD is pretty much rampant in the eastern states, the former communist GDR. There were 3 regional elections in September. They won outright for the first time in the very small state of Thuringia, and they came achingly close to winning in Saxony and in Brandenburg, which encircles Berlin. Across Western Germany, the AfD is not as powerful, but still pretty powerful. They're in all the regional parliaments, and they're very strong in the national parliament. Alongside them is this new insurgent force named after its creator, this woman called Sarah Wagenknecht. It's called BSW, named after her, the alliance of Sarah Wagenknecht. And she's a bizarre character. She came from the left-wing party, Die Linke, called The Left, and has morphed into far right. If you think of the horseshoe, it's where the two extremes join. So very nativist, very populist, anti-migrant, culture wars. But alongside that, pretty left-wing, socialist, anti-market, protectionist, statist economics. And between them, those two parties get pretty much half the vote in the East and around a quarter or maybe even up to a third of the vote in the West. And she, this woman, Wagenknecht, used to be called Stalin's favorite daughter. She used to praise Stalin. She's out and out pro-Putin and deeply worrying. So far, the mainstream parties, including the mainstream Conservative Party, the CDU, which is the main opposition party, have held absolutely firm on Ukraine.
Zooming out and looking forward, what do you think the impact of a new Trump presidency on a Europe where populist, hard right, whatever you want to call them, parties with a more sceptical line on intervention in Ukraine are in the ascendancy? What sort of impact do you imagine that might have?
I'm not usually, Patrick, one for hyperbole. I'm normally quite measured in what I write and what I say, but I think it would be an unmitigated disaster for Europe, both for European values, for European defense, for European cohesion. Now, nobody ever quite knows which Trump will turn up, but all the signs are that this Trump is going to be even more Trumpian, even more resolute, far, far more organized than his somewhat chaotic first term, when he was quite often on the quiet, gainsayed by some adults in the room. This time, he's absolutely going to choose people who I would categorize as like him on the far right.